Hi, and welcome to Hope Reserved, where we think through the Bible, theology, and worldview. Today I wanted to explore a question that I think is important to explore, and it's how can we know that the Bible is true? So the Bible has many spiritual and supernatural elements, claims about God and miracles that really can't be quantified or tested because God is immaterial, and the spiritual realm is outside of our physical realm. And because of that, there's a lot of debate about whether the Bible is true or not. And many think of it as just mythology, just stories of ancient people and just different ideas that they would come up with. And I first want to go into the idea of where did we get the idea of God? And I think it's a common thought today that we think of God as coming from just a made-up idea of ancient people. It's seen as this idea that when ancient people experienced uncontrollable things like nature and wind and storms and drought and all of these things, they associated it with gods because they really had no way to control it. And I really wanted to break this down and challenge this thought for a minute. So I want to look at what this statement claims. So it asserts that ancient people didn't understand the world around them and that they made up gods who could control these things to somehow help protect them or help give them what they wanted. So if you break it down even further, it's like saying ancient people couldn't tell the difference between made-up gods that they made themselves and a real spiritual being that has power over nature. So we often have this idea of ancient people that they're somehow inferior intelligence. They are, we have this idea that they're not as intelligent or rational as we are. When in reality, I think that they were just as rational and they are intelligent. They were intelligent. And if you think about it, they had to survive with a lot less than we do, and they still survived and lived and advanced. And if you think about it, a lot of the knowledge we have now was based on all of those who came before us. So I want to look at this another way. So if you looked at a person, if you look at an ancient person and you take away any form of revelation of God, so God can reveal himself supernaturally, God can reveal himself through nature. So through seeing creation, I believe God has created a way for us to observe his attributes in nature. And if you take away learning from other people with their experiences of God, and you take an ancient person and remove them from all of that, so they have no idea of God whatsoever. There's no revelation, no idea of God. And then they face something like a drought or a storm. So they would do just like what we would do if we faced a drought. So if you think about it, what do you do when you don't get enough rainwater for your crops? Well, you plant close to water, or you create some kind of irrigation system, or you bring water to your crops. So they would solve it just like any other rational human. And the same is true as if they were facing a big storm. They would go into a cave or build some kind of house or some kind of structure that could protect them from the storm. And this idea that ancient people had to create gods of their own to rule the universe over them, it's like saying we create an imaginary friend to have power over us, and then us being so captivated by that delusion that we sacrifice our children to these gods and give up our lives for these gods. It's really nonsense. If people, I believe there's really power behind these spiritual beings that people believed were gods. And I believe that there is a real spiritual God, one God that created everything. And I just wanted to challenge that notion that ancient people were unintelligent or irrational, because they were intelligent. They advanced in their time, and everything was built upon that. So, getting back to the Bible, so the Bible deals with the spiritual realm outside of the physical universe. There's supernatural events recorded in it. And it's important that we take a look and see, how can we know if the Bible's true? And I want to suggest that we look at it the same way that we would if we look at the wind blowing. How can we know the wind has blown through somewhere? And if you look at a gentle breeze, you might see some leaves or twigs out of place, or if you see hurricane force winds, you might see buildings blown over and trees knocked over. So even though you can't see the wind, you've seen where it's been. You've seen what has happened with the wind. In the same way, the Bible can be confirmed by the truth revealed through evidence. So just like when you look at the wind, there is evidence of it passing through. And when you look at history, there's evidence that what is said in the Bible is true. So we have archeological, prophetic, and historical events that help speak to the accuracy of the Bible. So some facts about the Bible. It was written over a 1,500-year span. It was written over 40 generations. There were many different classes of people who helped write it, from kings to statesmen, poets, peasants, fishermen, and philosophers. And then those who wrote it and made copies of it, the scribes took meticulous care. They were super strict about it. The Talmudic and the Masoretic scribes were anxious about scripture so much that one jot or tittle wouldn't pass away. And then the scribes confirmed the reliability of their copies, and then they burned anything that had mistakes in it. So there was great care taken in preserving the text over the generations. So first I want to get into the archaeological evidence. So the archaeological record helps us confirm the truthfulness of the Bible by confirming names and people and events in the Bible. So the names of these individuals showed up during the time or close to the lifetime of the person described. There were at least 53 names of kings that were found in the Bible that were confirmed their existence by inscriptions containing their names. And I just want to go through some notable names. So there was Necho II, the Pharaoh of Egypt, who was from 610 to 595 BC. This is 2 Chronicles 35:20. There was Mesha, king of Moab. This is early to mid 19th century. That's 2 Kings 3:4-27. There's Hazael, king of Aram, Damascus. So this is 844 to 800 BC. That was 1 Kings 19:15. Ahab, king of the northern kingdom of Israel. So it was 873 to 852 BC. That was 1 Kings 16:28. There was David, king of the southern kingdom. That was 1010 to 970 BC. And this was 1 Samuel 16:13. There was Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, which was 604 to 562 BC. And it was in 2 Kings 24:1. There was Cyrus the Great, king of Persia, 559 to 530 BC, and this was 2 Chronicles 36:22. So there's also some archaeological finds that give evidence to events that happened in the Bible. So one example is the Exodus, and there were found names in the Bible of Ramses, Python, and Yam-Surup, the Red Sea or Reed Sea. They're Hebrew names that correspond to the Egyptian name Pi Ramses, Pi Atium, and Pi Juf. So these were only found in the Egyptian text during the Ramses period. The second piece of evidence that supports the Exodus is a house that was built for workers that would tear down the temple of Ea and Horeb in Egypt's 18th dynasty. It was discovered in the 1930s by archaeologists at the University of Chicago. The temple was demolished during the 12th century. So the archaeologists found a 4-room house that was characteristic of the Israelites during the period. And the Israelites were it was the same period the Israelites would have been building these houses in Canaan. And the similarities of these two houses would suggest that the builders were closely related to Israelites. And then the third piece of evidence for the Exodus is the onomasticon amenope, which is a list of words from Egypt's third intermediate period. And it was written in historic and in Herrick, and it includes the Semitic name of the place. It's Brkt, referring to the lakes of Pithom. So in Egypt sources, this Semitic name was used for the lakes of Pithom rather than the original Egyptian name. So in this list of words, it used a Semitic word instead of an Egyptian word. So another important archaeological find is the destruction of Tel El Harmeen. So it's a Middle Bronze Age city, and it was potentially destroyed by a cosmic airburst. And it's geographically situated where Sodom was situated in Genesis 19. So there was 1.5 to 3 feet layer of ash, mud brick, and small pieces of pottery. Many pottery fragments had glazing and some bubbling into frothy magma, indicating that the temperature reached far above 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And while there's some disagreement whether this is the exact site of biblical Sodom, the location does fit the description in the Bible, and the events of Tel El Harmeen is within the same period of the Sodom event. And then the Assyrian city of Nineveh was confirmed in 1874 in northern Iraq. Austin Henry Layard explored the remains of Nineveh and discovered King Shenadab, the lost palace across from the Tigris River from Mosul, where in modern-day northern Iraq. King Shenadab is found in the Bible in 2 Kings 19:36. So Shenadab, the king of Assyria, departed and returned home and lived at Nineveh. So Nineveh was the Assyrian Empire's capital from 705 to 612 BC, and is thought to have been founded as early as 6000 BC. And there was carved sculptures indicating winged bulls were found in the northern palace of Ashurbanipal. Inscribed in cuneiform on the colossal sculpture in the doorway of his throne room was Shenadab's own account of his siege of Jerusalem. And then there's some evidence of the prophecies that were fulfilled by Jesus. So there was estimated 300 to 570 Old Testament prophecies about the Messiah. And here's some examples. So the Messiah would come from Nazareth. That was Isaiah 11:1 and Matthew 2:23. The Messiah would speak in parables. It was Psalm 78:2-4 and Matthew 13:10-15. The Messiah would be called a king. That's Zechariah 9:9. Matthew 27:37. The Messiah would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, and a potter's field would be bought with the money. That's Zechariah 11:12-13. Luke 22:47-48, and then Matthew 27:9-10. The Messiah would be silent when accused. That's Isaiah 53:7 and Mark 15:4-5. The Messiah would be killed with criminals. Isaiah 53:12 and Matthew 27:38. The Messiah would be sacrificed for sin. Isaiah 53 and Romans 5:6-8. And then a more recently fulfilled prophecy is the return of the Jewish people to their homeland. And this prophecies of the nation of Israel being dispersed among the nations and then returning to the land of Israel. It's in Ezekiel 20:41. Prophecy was written in 6th century BC, and it came true in 1948 AD. Now let's look at some historical evidence from outside of the Bible. So there's evidence of Jesus outside the Bible that it confirms his existence. Tychius, who was a Roman historian, reported on the decision of Emperor Nero's decision to blame Christians for the fire in 64 AD had destroyed Rome. Tychius said, Nero fastened the guilt on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name has its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hand of Pontius Pilate, and the most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea at the first sound of evil, but even in Rome. So this passage shows that Christians received their name from Christus, which is the Latin for Christ. He suffered extreme penalty, and Romans reading this would have understood that it was referring to crucifixion. And it occurred during the reign of Tiberius, and he was sentenced by Pontius Pilate, just like it was said in the Bible. Pliny the Younger. So in the letters of Pliny the Younger, he wrote to Emperor Trajan about 112 AD. Pliny writes about some information that he learned about Christians. He wrote to the Emperor Trajan and asked for legal advice on how to conduct proceedings against those who had been accused as Christians, because there was a great number of people from every class, age, gender, who stood accused of Christianity. They were in the habit of meeting on fixed day before it was light, when they sang in alternate verses to a hymn to Christ as to a God, and bound themselves by solemn oath, not any wicked deeds, but never to commit any fraud, theft, or adultery, never to falsify their word, or deny a trust when they should be called upon to deliver it up, after which it was their custom to separate and reassemble to partake of food, but food of an ordinary and innocent kind. So from this passage, we can confirm that Christians met on a set day before it was light. They sang to Christ as if he is a God. The passage confirms that Christ is a historical person, that Christians made commitment not to do any of these things that were listed. Josephus was a 1st century historian, so he wrote about Jesus, detailing the condemnation of James, the brother of Jesus, from the Jewish Sanhedrin. So Josephus speaks of the condemnation of James, and he calls him the brother of Jesus, the so-called Christ. So the next one is the Babylonian Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud was a set of writings by Jewish rabbis that was put together between 70 and 500 AD. And one of the most significant mentions of Jesus is this. On the eve of the Passover, Yeshua was hanged for 40 days before the execution took place. A herald cried, "He is going forth to be stoned because he practiced sorcery and enticed Israel to apostasy." So, since this is Jewish writings, they use Yeshua, or Yeshua, it's Jesus in Greek. So, in Jewish, it's Yeshua. And the term hanged can be used to refer to crucifixion. And this was used in Luke 23:39, where it says Jesus was hanged. The reference to stoning is just like John 8:59, and it shows where the Jews were planning to stone Jesus. So Lucian is a 2nd century Greek and a satirist who wrote this about Christians. The Christians worshipped a man to this day, the distinguished personage who introduced their novel rites and was crucified on that account. It was impressed on them that their original lawgiver, that they are all brothers from the moment that they are conceived, the moment they are converted, and deny the gods of Greece, and worship the crucified sage, and live after his laws. So from the passage, It talks about relationships of Christians with Jesus. It's clear that Jesus was a man that was being worshipped, and Jesus made many mad because of his teaching, and it led to his crucifixion. And it taught the early Christians to deny the Greek gods and live according to his laws. So we've looked at a lot of different evidence from archaeology, fulfilled prophecies, and external historical evidence. And I think all of this evidence provides a pretty compelling argument for the Bible being truthful and accurate. And of course, as we mentioned at the beginning, if you're coming at this from the worldview that there is no such thing as a spiritual realm and there's no such thing as miracles, then you're going to have a hard time believing it, however much evidence there is. But if you're open to it, if you're willing to seek the truth, I believe that you'll find it. And I believe that there's truth in the Bible, and I believe it's the Word of God. And I hope through this video and lesson that you've learned some important details of why we can trust the Bible. So thanks for listening.